Alan, thanks for joining us. I want to start with something you wrote that really kind of sets the stage in terms of who Michael Wernick is and what his job is, in case it's not clear to our viewers. You wrote, quote, you would think that the person in the federal government fighting at every turn to protect nonpartisan, apolitical public service would be the clerk of the Privy Council. But Michael Wernick has shown himself throughout this affair as having misunderstood that role or completely forgotten about it in his efforts to please his political bosses. Can you explain to us what the problem with this is?
Okay, so Michael Wernick is the top senior public servant in the government. So he's nonpartisan. He's not an elected official. He did come into the job just after the Liberals came into power, but theoretically, they're like deputy ministers. Every department has a deputy minister who's a senior public servant in the department. The deputy minister of all deputy ministers is Michael Wernick. He also happens to be the deputy minister for the prime minister. So he wears, I think it's 3 different hats.
So he's like the top bureaucrat, I guess.
Exactly.
So, and he's not only defended the PMO in this, but also several individual cabinet ministers for their high standard of ethics. All of this without prompting to do so, as you point out in the op-ed, while he's also thrown some shade on Jody Wilson-Raybould's character. This, of course, isn't his job if he's to be apolitical. Why is he doing this? What's your theory?
You know, well, the thing is, he does wear a couple of hats. So he's the deputy minister for the prime minister. So he's supposed to sort of back up the Prime Minister's office, which is really the political wing, which is, made up of not of full-time public servants, but people who are brought in by whoever is Prime Minister. So he's in charge, but he's supposed to be providing them with sort of basically technical, factual backup, all sorts of coordination. But he's also the head of the public service, which is supposed to be nonpartisan. Mm-hmm. I think the thing is that increasingly, the Privy Council office, which he runs and is sort of twinned with the PMO, the Prime Minister's office, and this goes back to Harper and before, has been really sort of shoved more and more to really helping the Prime Minister, helping the government in power do their thing, which ends up, I think, going too often into the political realm, right?
Yeah.
So even though that I think is the problem, and the thing is that he's really there are all these political people around him, ministers, the prime minister, chiefs of staff, etc., who are all pressuring him to do one thing or another. And I think that sometimes maybe somebody like Wernick succumbs and just figures and maybe gets a little confused about what he's supposed to be doing.
Well, and you've called him, quote, a serial partisan, a chameleon who changes his stripes as governments change. And you said that he predates the Liberal government. He's been in politics for a long time. He was there with Harper's government. But when you have this sort of behavior, what does it do to the system?
Well, I think what happens in the system is that, I know this sounds like something out of political science class. There's this idea of truth to power, of speaking truth to power. So in other words, if you're a public servant and a politician comes before you and suggests something, right, which he thinks is a wonderful political fix to an issue, the nonpartisan public servant is there to sort of say, wait a second, this may not be fully legal. You may have to change the law to do this. This is going to get you into all sorts of trouble with something else. We cannot really do this. So the problem is that if you've got a system where deputy ministers and up to Mr. Wernick seem to be sort of going along with what the government is asking it in all cases, then we've got a problem. We have this whole, and I'll make a sort of parallel to the Phoenix pay system. Okay, that was started under Harper, right? Mm-hmm. The Harper government really wanted to go ahead with this centralization of pay because they wanted to put jobs in New Brunswick, etc. Now, did the bureaucrats there sort of say, wait a second, there may have been bureaucrats who thought, you know what, this isn't a very good idea. There are all sorts of possibilities that this is going to fail. But perhaps they're held back because they're under so much pressure to please their political bosses. And that's why I find this is a little bit disturbing, because in the case we're at hand, basically SNC-Lavalin, the Montreal company, engineering company, was asking didn't like the ruling by the head of the Public Prosecution Service in a criminal case, right? So they thought, well, we can get this case sort of turned into a deferred prosecution agreement, which they wanted, some sort of settlement. But she is a public servant, and in the law, she's supposed to be the final word. The Attorney General, meaning Jody Wilson-Raybould, can override her, but that's never done. It hasn't been done in 12 years. So they were, so the question is, I would think that Mr. Wernick, as the head of the public service, should have been there to remind the government, well, wait a second, this is the role of the Director of Public Prosecutions, who is a public servant, to do this. This is his role to defend her, not to try to do a runaround or a workaround to sort of get her decision overturned. That's what really bothers me in this case.
Well, I guess we're going to have to watch tomorrow for Wernick's testimony as well as Gerald Butt's testimony tomorrow, and just see kind of how far they're willing to go to the wall for the PMO.
Yeah, because Wernick, one thing, Wernick appeared already, but then Jody Wilson-Raybould basically contradicted him, so I think he's going to come back and try to correct what he said earlier. I don't really know. Well, we watch eagerly. Thanks so much for sharing your insight into this. Okay, you're welcome.